Welcome, everybody. We got a nice little turnout today. Good start. Probably have a couple of others drop by, which is fine. We'll welcome them. The usual couple of reminders. Don't forget today is the last day to submit your contest entries for passenger cars. And we'll be sending out the ballot midweek for folks to vote. And the announcement will be at next Saturday's general meeting. Same time, same place right here. Different Zoom connection though. So we'll be sending that out during the week. And don't forget, stay tuned after the business meeting for Spring Creek Model Trains virtual store tour. I've seen them do this a couple of times since we set this up. And it's pretty nice little presentation. They go up and down the aisles and show you exactly what they have on the shelf. And there's a couple of ways to order from them. I'm sure they'll go over this next week, but you can send them an email and ask them for something, and they'll either tell you if they have it or if they can get it, or they do have some things listed on their website. Let's get her started. We have Rob Cooper going to lead her off, followed by Bruce, and then Steve and the Russ show. Rob, take her away.
Thanks for having me and getting this thing set up. Ron did a lot of help with me on getting the pictures and the video together along with Russell. We got here last week and did a little bit of it, so hope it's going to turn out okay. I'm really just going to narrate through. The first part is going to be just a quick 3-minute walkthrough on a video of the railroad. And the big thing I've done now that most of you have not seen is I've got 36 blue LED dimmable can lights up in the ceiling of the train room. So going to incorporate some night ops in the future once everybody gets back together and we come down here. So looking forward to doing that. I'm working on the adjusting the flow of things as we speak, and hopefully later this year when COVID thing's a little more under control, we can get about a dozen or so down here and get the night ops flavor towards the end of the regular ops. So that's really the goal. I had this all put in with the help of an electrician back in December. So I've run it several times and myself, and I think it seemed to be working good, and we're looking forward to getting it going and seeing how it works and everyone's eyesight with the low light. But anyway, Ron, whenever you want to start that video, and I'll just do a quick talk as it's going through. It's late 1950s. The L&N Railroad, as several of you know, through central Kentucky, between Knoxville and Cincinnati. And I believe the video here shortly will start just coming out of Knoxville stage and going northbound. So when it gets going.
Let me just say, Rob, that the video is handheld. Rob doesn't have a camera dolly yet, so it's a little bit jiggly, but it's short. So the purpose of the video was really to show what the layout looks like with night lights. So
and we've got some good pictures that Russell took a couple of weeks ago at the end of the video, and that's really going to show a lot of the scenes better. So bear with us through the little bit of this. I think the pictures that Russell helped me with, people will appreciate that here in just a few minutes. So once it gets going, it'll be northbound out of Cincinnati, out of Knoxville station. Coming around the corner, I've got 3 of these corridors, and this is the first one. The upper deck represents going east into the coal fields of Kentucky. That lower level is south, or actually going northbound out of Knoxville, heading north towards Cincinnati. And this is the town of Lott, Kentucky. It's just north of the Tennessee-Kentucky border. The L&N Railroad actually had some switching there back in the 50s. Upper level there is coal fields going east, represented eastbound. That lower level, just at the bottom of the screen there, is the main line continuing north, heading towards Cincinnati. Coming around the second corridor here, and I've got a number of lights. In addition to putting these can lights in the ceiling, I've lit probably 80% of the buildings and layout. I got a few more I'm going to do, but got some representation there. Some of the wooden scenic cars there with the LED lights in them. I'm not quite as technical as Tom is. I know he's done a lot of his cars He's gone painstakingly to do his automobiles with lights in it, but I kind of went the cheap way or the easy way and went Woodland Scenics. And some of these buildings I've lit recently. And it continues around north. This is actually the town of Corbin, Kentucky. And this area is, as several of you know, it's got a lot of switching opportunity. It's probably the most difficult switching. There's 9 industries in there, and it takes the fastest operator I think has done it was probably Bruce, and he did it in just under an hour. Most of the time it takes over an hour just to switch that. It's a local coming out of the Winchester yard that comes over with an RS3 and does the switching and turns back. And like I said, it's pretty interesting switching. Coming around to the last corridor, this is a mountain that we can compress time and distance with. It's about 12 feet inside, and the main line on the back is continuing north. And then this is the town of Winchester, Kentucky, with a lot of switching as well. And that switching is performed by the yard master, which is typically Ron and Fred, and they will assign somebody to help with the local switching in the yard. And as we come around the corner here, get a good look at the main yard. The first part, you're going to see the diesel servicing area with 3 tracks. That's the building coming into view right there. And I've got some lights in the yard as well now, LED lights. Got that lit up. Hopefully I've got them spaced out enough where Ron and Fred doesn't bump their hands in them too bad. And this is the 9 track classification yard in Winchester. And then coming up is the caboose track and the rip track, maintenance away tracks, all in this area here. And as we turn the corner to the north end of Winchester yard, it proceeds northbound heading towards Cincinnati. A couple more switching opportunities there. And junkyard. And you got a farm. Everyone has to have a farm. This represents Kentucky River. And another farm on this side, and approaching the town of Falmouth, Kentucky, just south of Cincinnati, and just before it goes into the tunnel for staging representing the north end of Cincinnati. I think this is pretty much the end of the video. Yeah, now we'll just have the still shots that Russell did most of this. He did a fantastic job with them. And that's one of the coal tipples. The other one there in the eastern part going up towards Loyal, Kentucky. It starts in Corbin, Kentucky, and east towards Loyal, Virginia, I should say. This is the town of Corbin, Kentucky. Got a fire going on the scene there. And this is the can lights turned down just a little bit lower so you get a little more night operations. I think what we will do once we get well into the operating session, most of the switching will be completed. Maybe the last 20 or 25 minutes, we'll start turning the lights down and do mostly just train running so guys can get the flavor of just running the trains in the night pops. But I think most of the switching we'll do with most of the regular fluorescent lights turned on. This is also in town of Winchester there. That's downtown Winchester. Got a lot of lights, but quite a few in the buildings. And this has kind of been all occurring the last 6 months, along with the lights up in the ceiling. So I've been kind of busy. This has been my COVID project for sure. Got quite a bit finished on it. And just more scenes of the one of the 4 towns I have in the railroad. And that's in Corbin, Kentucky as well. Mail carrier running down the street. And this is the rock quarry in Lott, Kentucky. And they actually had one in Lott, Kentucky back in the day. So rough representation of it. I know a lot of guys will recognize some of these buildings. A lot of them are Woodland Scenics. I don't have, I either don't have or choose not to refine the skills enough to build a lot of this stuff. So I have purchased a number of them pre-built, but we've gone in and worked on them some anyway. But other than that, I built 99% of the railroad myself. And that's it. Pretty much in a nutshell, point to point. There's no crazy tunnels going in and out. Where's my train coming from? It's everyone knows exactly where it's going. It's pretty straightforward railroad. It's got good wide aisles, 4 feet wide, so there's plenty of room for people to pass. And like I said, about half of you on here have been down here several times and run it, but a few of you have not. But that's kind of my what my vision was and turned out to be. First railroad I've ever built, and finally 9 years ago had a house built where I could put the layout in the basement. And this is what I turned out to be with it. So,
Hey, Rob,
yes.
I don't know how many of the guys tuned in here are familiar with the Woodland Scenics Just Plug, but you might want to
Yes.
tell them how many of the modules or the hubs
Yeah.
that you have to do all this.
Absolutely. Yeah. A good portion of this is the plug and play, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with. In fact, this scene you see right there is a plug and play in the building. And then also those wooden pole lights are also plug and play. I've got 95 pole lights of the buildings. I think there's about 40 buildings with the plug and play in them. Some of them I actually installed. A lot of them didn't have it. And I went up in and installed them later. So other than if you remember in the Winchester Yard, where I had the yard lights, those are just regular LEDs I put together and have them on a separate power supply. But other than that, everything's pretty much the plug and play. As far as modules, I haven't counted them, but I'm going to say there's at least 20 of the modules underneath the layout around. These lights here are the ones that are LED. I actually converted those from incandescent to LEDs. I did that about 4 years ago, and I put them back in a box and hadn't even dug them out till recently, and almost forgot about them, but got them installed now. So hopefully Fred and Ron, when they do the yard work there, will enjoy those when we get here. And I need to count those modules, but there's a lot of them, a lot of wiring, a lot of real small, intricate wiring. If anyone's done those, I'm sure some have, but it's probably the easiest way to to get lights up and going. These LEDs you're seeing here a little more cumbersome, building it, then hooking it into a bus underneath and running a different power supply. But a lot of soldering there. But the plug and play works great. A little pricey, but they work well.
How many plugs can you get on the light hub there?
Yeah, typically 4, but they put out a new thing. Woodland Scenics did about a year ago. They've actually got a real small green hub that you can snap into one of the hubs of 4, and it gives you 4 more within that same hub, which really works good. I've got 7 of those. I do recall that. I've actually got 7 of those to add. When I started filling in lights in a certain area, I was running out of the hub ports. So for just a few bucks, you can add one of those little 4-way hubs to snap into the regular original Woodland Scenics hubs, and that gives you 4 more opportunities to plug things in. Now, the nice thing, the wooden pole lights, those you can plug several of those into one hub. They've got a little like almost a little scissors thing, or a like a clothespin that you slip the real tiny wires into, and you can put up to 6 of those in one hub. So that works out good. So I have 95 of those pole lights, but I'm not using 95 hub ports. I'm probably using a total of 20 for all 95. So that saves.
And that the little I guess add-on hub that you were just talking about, is that a Woodland Scenics?
It is. It sure is. It's Woodland Scenics product. I don't recall the name of it, but it's the Woodland Scenics. The hubs are either red or blue. The blue ones are what extends the red hubs, and this one's about half the size and it's green. It's really, if you look on the Woodland Scenics side or anywhere, I'm sure even. I'm thinking, Russell, do you know offhand if Scale has that?
We to my knowledge, no.
Okay.
That's why I wasn't familiar with it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it really helps. It saves a lot of money because you can expand on it without having to buy a $15 hub every time you run out of 4 spots. So it's really been a good add-on. I think they just came out last year with it. And like I said, I've got 7 of them already, and it really helped reduce the amount of the more expensive hubs. So I definitely recommend if someone's going this route to pick those up.
Yeah.
Rob, Stan White.
Yes, Stan.
Yeah, great looking job there you've done. Also, in my experience with the plug and play is you can also use the less expensive LEDs like some of the lights that you can get from Weonics,
Okay.
some of those others, and use that in the plug and play system as well. Any
Okay.
LEDs will work in that system. And I've done like you've done. I've plugged in several. I kind of test them. I think some of the lights you can get 4 in there, some you can get 5 in there. You just I kind of pre-play with them before I hook them up on the layout, but you can really shorten the number of hubs you need by doing some of that stuff.
Yeah, that's, you know what, I didn't think about it. Someone else's LEDs. Yeah, I'm sure that would work as well. I guess that'd probably be a cheaper way to do it, actually. Of course, a day late and $1 short on mine. So,
Bruce, are you ready? You're on. Looks good.
I'm on. Okay, well, thanks for having me back again, guys. I got a rather short presentation for you today compared to some of the others I've done. In specific, it's about a passenger train I chose to model, Santa Fe, of course. And it was kind of by accident, picking the train and the locale of my railroad just worked out together. I modeled in the desert Southwest in the summer or fall of 1967. And that's the basis for the train I've got here. The train, of course, by the title is the San Francisco Chief. It ran between Chicago and the San Francisco Bay Area, and I'll give you a little bit of history about that. A little about how I chose the train, how I modeled the train specifically for one locale, all the cars that are in it, and what you'd actually see in the train at that time. This photograph is the Muir Trestle, and it's near a place called Martinez, California. And one of the current Division 8 members tells me he was a bridge troll and he lived under that trestle for a while. So he's familiar with the Santa Fe trains going across it there. Excuse me, a little bit of history. San Francisco Chief came along late in life of the railroad's passenger service. It was June 1954 when the Santa Fe put the train into service, and they called it Train 1, not because it was the premier train. The Super Chief was the premier train, but it's just a number that was available in their number system. And odd number trains were westbound trains, even numbers were eastbound trains. And the terminal was in Oakland, California. It was near San Francisco, but across the bay. In 1958, they changed it to terminal. They changed the terminal to Richmond, which is in the Santa Fe East Bay area. And they would get folks downtown in a bus system. 1961 inaugurated mail carriage on container flat cars, and I'll show you these in my train here. But a container flat car is basically an old Santa Fe buffet lounge library car, heavyweight car that they stripped down to the frame, put a deck on it, and configured it so you could carry containers of mail stored all the way from Chicago to the West Coast and back. Brought in a significant source of revenue for the train and the railroad. 1964, the high-level chair cars were added to the train, and this gave them increased capacity per car for carrying coach class passengers. I'll describe a couple of them as we go along there, and the numbers that go with them. And then when Amtrak started in 1971, it spelled the end of the San Francisco Chief. So it lasted just a hair short of 17 years in its life. I'm modeling in 1967, so I'll be between the 64 and the 71 timeframe here. This is the first train. It left Chicago, 14 cars. This not only shows the Chicago to the West Coast cars, but what happened in between. And there was only a few stops where they switched cars in or out, either meeting or diverging to other Santa Fe trains, or perhaps originating and terminating at that point there. That's the way it started. Up to 1966, and with a little bit of licensing, again, I modeled 67. 66 is when the train had its peak years of service. He would leave Chicago with 14 cars, and you can see the description of the cars in the train there. And when I show you the constant on the way here, we'll see that not all the cars made it all the way. Down here is what caught my eye in the beginning, is that leaving Clovis, the train was up to 20 cars long. And this was a summertime consist, and that matches my modeling also. And then you can see some of the other cars that were added or deleted from the train along the way. Power for the train was either F units or the Alco PA units, and the numbers of units changed over time. As the train grew longer, and in some senses to cover aging power plant units up front, they switched from 3 Fs to 4, sometimes even up to 5 units. And the Alcos, they started with 3 and ended up usually with 4. So we had either 8,000 horsepower Alco, or we had 6,000, 7,500 horsepower from GE pulling the train. Once again, 58 to 67, the time frame I'm in there, we're using F units. I've got 5 of them at that point, and I've got 4 PAs I can alternate with to power the train. A guy named Fred Fraley did a lot of historical work on passenger train consists for the Santa Fe. He used railroad records, depot system records, everything he could get his hand on. And he would build these rosters of what cars were in what train, what portion of the route those cars ran in, and where those cars may have come from or going to. You can see down here, we're talking about a 1032 sleeper. They connected with other trains, either coming or going, all the way along the route. And that was the basis for the number of cars in the consist of the train to be constantly changing, leaving Chicago with 14 and arriving in California with maybe 17 or 18 and growing to as many as 20 en route. So I took this chart and I broke the route down by every individual route segment up here and by what kind of car ran in that segment and created this chart. So here we see in a different format, Chicago to Kansas City to Topeka, on and on down the line, Clovis to Belen, and what car or cars were in that train. And here you can see in the biggest or the longest train that they ran at that time, there's my 20-car train, Clovis to Belen, New Mexico. The coincidence was I had chosen the locale for my railroad as the desert Southwest. So 2 coincidences came together there to make my train appropriate to see during that time frame in that part of the country. Now, using that chart, I created kind of a flow chart here of a pictorial representation of what was in the train. And it's not really super sophisticated. West is to the left in the picture here. There are the 14 cars the San Francisco chief left Chicago with. It got to San Francisco. 1 mail car got, Kansas City, jumped ahead there. Got to Kansas City, 1 mail car came out, 3 storage mails, another storage mail and an en route mail service car were put in the train. And using some of Santa Fe's logic, and probably a lot of other railroads did too, if they had to modify the configuration of the train en route, they probably did not want to break up the train and do a lot of switching. So they did what's called, they worked against the train. They would add and remove cars generally from the ends of the train rather than trying to have to work in the middle. Now that wasn't 100% rule. There were times, and we'll see it a little later in this train, where they had to break the train in the middle to get specific cars in or out in the order they wanted them in. So rolling out of Kansas City, the train right below the yellow box there is what it looked like. It would have 14, 15, 16, 17 cars in the train at that point. It gets down to Topeka, and en route mail car was switched out. We're down to 16 cars now in the configuration in the line below the yellow box. Onward to Newton, Kansas, they put a railway post office in, and just thinking again, how do you do this? Well, it's easiest to put it in the front of the train. And we know eventually, because that other chart, it's going to come out. So rather than stuff it in the middle someplace, put it someplace where you can access it easy. You get down to Amarillo, the Newton railway post office car that they put in, and the en route mail came out of the train, and you can see that in the line right below it there, which dropped the train to 15 cars. But in Amarillo, they put another railway post office in, brought it back up to 16 cars. chugging on down the line. Next in line was Clovis. And this is where the big changes. One en route male, a 664 sleeper were switched out, 3 regular coaches, a lunch counter diner, a 10-6 and a 10-3-2 sleeper were added to the train, and that brought it up to its 20-car configuration, leaving Clovis. And it ran all the way across the strait to Belen, New Mexico, where they had some cars removed from the train. There were, well, here, those were all the cars that were added into the train and a couple of sleepers on the end. They got down to Belen, take the post office car out, we're down to 19. Then on the way over to Barstow, the coaches were hauled out. Some of those coaches that they put in were removed, and the car would look something like this. And here's an example where, yes, they worked the middle of the train there, and they worked the middle of the train there. Santa Fe liked to keep similar class cars together. They would keep the coach cars together. They would keep the sleeping cars together. They wouldn't intersperse them usually unless there was some good reason to do that. So you wouldn't walk between a 48-seat coach and a 10-3-2 sleeper and then back to a high-level coach, something like that. But that's an example where they did work the middle of the train. And that took it down to 15 cars. Bakersfield, they put some coaches back in, and it was either 1 or 2 cars. It didn't matter. It was based on how much traffic they had that day. And it could be your 44 or 48-seat coach put back in the train, 1 or 2 of them, and that would bump it up back up to 16 or 17 cars. And that's how it arrived in the San Francisco area. So it left Chicago with 14. The constant went up and down from a low of 14 to a high of 20 and back somewhere in the high teens for arrival in the West. All right, my train. Slide later on says I worked about 20 years trying to put this train together, and that's correct. I had cars from just about anybody out there that made passenger cars. I had kits from American Limited. I had kits from, I can't remember the name, they had a red box on them, but they made generic passenger cars. I had Athearn. I had some Walthers, some Rivarossi, some IHC, which sometimes look like the same car. But along the way, doing more research and with manufacturers producing some better quality equipment, I was able to upgrade over that 20-year period and got a train that is now complete with cars with full interiors in them, 100% absolutely prototypically correct for that car at that particular time. And that's the basis of my train. So starting in the front of it, the head end equipment, Bud produced some lightweight railway post office cars. They were in the 80 to 110 series. It was 31 of them. The model I have is 110, the last one out of the factory at that time. An express box. Santa Fe made these cars themselves in their Topeka shops, and they would either buy parts from parts manufacturers or they would manufacture everything themselves. Santa Fe made this group of 25 cars. The model I have is number 2134. Next came the mail container flat car. And these were not built in the configuration you see them. As I mentioned before, they were started as heavyweight lounge parlor cars, library cars, things that the first class passengers could relax in on their trips on the Santa Fe. When they reached the end of their normal service life, the Santa Fe stripped them down to the frame, put a deck on it, and the materials and the fasteners necessary to load containers of mail. And the containers were loaded in Chicago westbound. We saw in the consist there that this particular one made it all the way to California. Other trains actually used these cars, and at certain times, even the San Francisco chief would have more than one of these that may be switched in or out of the train along the way, depending on what the mail load was at the time. The photograph on the right of the one I have, the lens kind of foreshortened it. It really is 85 scale feet long with 4 20-foot containers sitting on the top of it. Next, regular old baggage car. American Car and Foundry made a series of cars, 25 of them. The model I have is model number 3681 from that series. On into the chair cars. A 44-seater, Pullman made these. The model I have in the number sequence is 2923. And it's 48-seat chair cars. The train, as we saw when it left Clovis on the way to Belen, had 3 of these cars in it there. Bud made these particular cars. My number sequence is shown on the right there, all from the same series of 48-seat chair cars. And that brings us into the high-level chair cars. Now, the last 2 we saw had either 44 or 48 seats in them. These types of chair cars, the high-level chair cars, had either 68 or 72 seats in them. The 68-seaters had 68 because one end of the car, where it had the low-level diaphragm, also had the stairs internally that led up to the second level of the high-level car. And that took out the provision for 4 seats, basically. Well, why did they do this? Well, A, money was a driving factor. If I got a car with 68 or 72 seats in it, I can make more revenue than a car that has 44 or 48 seats in it. And to accomplish that, they moved all the utility services, the lavatories, all the mechanical equipment, even some luggage storage downstairs in the car, which allowed the full upper level available for passenger seating. That's the 68 seat. And if you've got a consist with one of these cars in it, you got to have another one, because once you raise the passenger passageway up to the high level, you got to get them back down again someday. So we'll see another one of these. The other 2 cars in the train are 72-seaters. And you can see the difference in the diaphragm here. It's a high-level diaphragm. There's no opening at the lower level for anybody to get through. And because it didn't have stairs at one end, they could put 72 seats in it. So it's even a couple extra dollars they earned along the way. The 2 in this series I have are 703 and 720 from the 72-seaters. After that, and of course I mentioned you got to have another step-down car, so we had actually 4 high levels. A lunch counter, diner, dorm car. Instead of a formal dining room, it had a lunch counter in it with a few tables to go with it, sandwiches, minimal hot food service, beverages go along with it there, plus some crew space for crew rest along the way, along the route the car would travel on. And this one is 1573 out of the Pullman group that was built. They had 12 cars in there. Then a food service car, a 46-seat dining car. And this had tables for 2 and 4 up and down the length of it, along with the kitchen at one end of the car. Bud built this series of cars. My model is number 1477. I was truly impressed when I got this car and looked in. All the tables have place settings on them and flower vases. So if you get down really close and peek in the window, it really does look like a dining car. Another one of the food service is a full dome dorm lounge. Actually, food is a misnomer here. It had a lounge area in the lower level down here, along with some dormitory space again for the operating crew, not the engine crew, but the passenger train crew. And upstairs, there were seats kind of in the viewing area. The seats were canted towards the outside of the car rather than facing strictly fore and aft. And yes, the windows on this car were tinted green. They weren't tinted on the high level chair cars. And even though this has got a higher level, this is a low level car. The passageways in and out of it were all at the normal train level down there. Moving on to the sleeping cars. A 4-1 is a 4 drawing room, 1 bedroom car. The Vista series built by Pullman were the ones commonly used in the train. And these cars were originally built with boat tail observation ends on them, which, yes, you could put them in a train. They had couplers, they had air and steam and signal lines, but they lacked a little utility in that they had no door that the passengers could travel between the cars on. So it kind of limited the car to being the very last car on the train, no matter what. Well, along the way, Santa Fe decided they were going to square off the ends. Their own shops did this. Little rounded corners here, still got observation windows, but a door and a vestibule and I forget the name, whatever they call that thing there. And steam and signal there, steam and signal lines to go with it. So they could use it mid-train in certain applications. And based on the route of this train and where this car was placed in the train, it did stay in the middle of the train the whole way. We got a 10-3-2 sleeper, 10 rooms, 3 bedrooms, 2 compartments. Pullman built these in the Blue Series for the Santa Fe. It was probably, I think close to 30 of these total along the way. I have Blue Lake and Blue Water. Diaphragm, that's the word I was looking for. Diaphragm is the name of that thing there. I got Pine Series cars. These are 10.6s. They had 10 rooms in them and 6 bedrooms. Again, it was a pretty high number, somewhere in the high 20s of these cars that Santa Fe owned. I have Pine Beach and Pine Rapids. So that goes through the consist of the type of cars, the exact cars I've got in the train. Here's a little summary of what I said earlier, that I had been trying to acquire an exact replica of this train. It took me quite a while to do it. When I finally had it all together, and I had the two coincidences, that's a hard word, that came together, Desert Southwest and this particular train between Clovis and Belen matched up. And that's what I chose to model, and that's what I worked for towards the end. And I put together a video here of the train as I run it on my railroad. You can see it looks like the Desert Southwest. We'll cue the train here. I happen to have in this video the 5 F units pulling it. And like I mentioned, I also have 4 PAs that I alternate with occasionally. There's the railway post office, the home-built storage mail, the mail container flat car, and a regular baggage car, the 44-seat chair car, followed by 3 48-seaters. And then we'll see the lunch counter diner dorm, and the first of the steps up cars, 68 seats, 2 72-seaters, and another 68 seat with the steps down leading to the big dome dorm lounge, followed by the 46-seat diner, the 4-1 series Vista series car, a 1032 blue, a couple of 10-6 pines, and bringing up the markers is the last 1032 blue with the train drumhead and the red taillight in it there. That's my 20-car San Francisco Chief, 1966 version. And if you thought 20 cars was a lot, I do. And just to sidestep for a minute, sometimes train lengths were limited, or the railway wanted to limit them by depot availability. Train originated in Chicago at Dearborn Station. It was a stub-ended station with one way in and out. Departing trains were staged with the motive power pointed out. Arriving trains, the motive power pulled it all the way into the depot and stopped. En route, it didn't matter that much, but about the longest they could ever accommodate anywhere was 20 cars. They'd like to keep it usually below 18, but we can see in this case, 20 cars, it was in the middle of New Mexico. There were no stub-ended depots, so it didn't really matter that much. But I found this photograph. This was taken at Abo Canyon, which was a photographer, a company photographer place on the railroad because of the sweeping curve, and you could look at a whole train all in one view. There's a 21-car San Francisco Chief. It's the eastbound version. It's train 2. It's not described in the text or the book I pulled this out of why it has 21 cars, but I was able to determine a couple differences. It looks like there's more head-end cars in this train than there are in the one I ran, including 2 mail container flat cars. So even though mine only has 1, this eastbound train, this particular day, had 2. We only have 3 high-level chair cars back here, though, instead of the 4 I run. There's the 3 high levels. There's the big dome dorm lounge. And it's either got another lounge or perhaps another sleeping car after the big dome dorm lounge here. You can count 6 of them total behind it there, bringing the train up to 21 cars total. So even though 20 might have been a lot, 21 is even more. This was the exception to the rule. And it looks like the F unit left town with its MU door open up here on the nose. I don't know why they didn't close it or anything like that. All righty, where did I get all this from? The Santa Fe Railway Historical and Modeling Society publishes a quarterly magazine called The War Bonnet. Mike Flick contributed this article. He himself is a super Santa Fe passenger ops wealth of information. Using his article, I know him personally. He actually owns a hobby shop up in Columbus, Indiana. It's called the Train Station. You ever go up there someday, go stop in and see the train station. It's a really nice, good railroad, exclusive railroad hobby shop. He doesn't have airplanes and race cars and, you know, paint by number kits in there. It's all railroads. The Society itself publishes reference series books. They've done them for all the different types of freight cars that Santa Fe has, and they've done them for all the different types of passenger cars. And that's where a lot of the information about the specifics of each kind of these cars came from for me. And then, of course, starting with Fred Fraley's document, what every passenger train virtually had in it for quite a few years of Santa Fe ops. That's where all the information that I got to build this train came from. So there you have it. We can throw it open to questions if anybody's got questions, depending on how much time I've used up. And I thank you guys for your attention.
Thank you, Bruce. We've learned a lot about your train from watching this. Mr. Weis and Mr. Lasher.
The main problem with trying to model a signal system is just the signals themselves. And I will try to put together sort of a bibliography or list of sources that I can give to Fred, and he can post on Groups.io or whatever and circulate for sources for some of the things that you can use. But the first part of this is going to be about how you can make operating signal systems. The next slide, Russell. The thing you have to do with a signal system is know that there is a train there, and it really breaks down into two kinds of detection systems. You can either do optical detections, which is what we see here on the left, with Russell has kindly put the red arrows. Those are photoresistors. They work. These actually are working in conjunction with his grade crossing at Purina Road. And they look fairly obvious in this photo, but I guarantee you, if you're sitting there looking at the layout, you kind of have to hunt for them to find them. They're not nearly as obvious as they look in the photo. And then in the middle are some of the current detectors, if you're going to opt for a current detection system. And then on the far right hand is one of the current detectors with a wire passing through it. I think it's probably an induction scheme that it connects to the system to let it know that there is equipment in the block. So next slide, Russell.
Whoops. There we
go. Next slide. There we go. Okay. On the left is a logic rail signal animator. We've used these on the portable layout for K&I, and they're pretty effective, used with Details West signals. The beauty of these is they can all be self-contained, and we can make the signals removable on the portable layout. And the kids think they're pretty cool when the signal changes from green to red and then goes back to yellow and then back to green again. And for some layouts, that'd be perfectly fine. You're never going to be able to completely replicate the operation of a prototype signal system, short of spending an ungodly amount of money to do it. But so these are a great way to imitate it. On the right is Russell's. We're working on the installation here for his Albany area. To the right, you see the circuit board that has the block detectors connected to it, back to those block current detectors. Those connect into that. And that in turn goes back over here to the Arduino, which is what Russ and Mike hopefully will be getting together on to plug in. And our Arduino will actually physically control the signals, indications that the signals give. And they will do it based on the occupancy of the blocks and the routing of the switches and so forth. He had a fellow out in California, Dennis. What's Dennis's last name, Russell?
Drury.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. Dennis was pretty much a guru on this, and he kind of figured out. Well, he told Russell what he needed to do as far as the Arduinos and programming them and so forth. So that's one way to make the system operable. I will have to say the signal animator is perfectly valuable way to just do the occasional signal and would add a lot to anybody's layout. Russell also has from Logic Rail the crossing signal animator, and that's what runs the crossing flashers there at Purina Road. It's after Russell had a few issues figured out. I can't remember the guy's name there at Logic Rail, but he was more than happy to be helpful and get that working for us. And it was pretty effective, just having crossing flashers that work. Next slide, Russell.
Yeah, Steve, can I just
Sure.
interject for the signal animator? The reason why we went to the Arduino is that the signal animator there will only animate one target. And as Steve pointed out to me, unfortunately, the central like to use a whole bunch of targets, mainly to indicate some speed, not and along with routing. So it was going to take, and I think these signal animators are about $20 a pop there. So it would have taken a bunch of these to do what the Arduino is going to do. So that's why we went that route.
Okay, next one. There we go. Okay, next we're going to move on to things that you can specifically do to spruce up the layout and add a higher level of realism to your layout. Things that we're going to talk about here in more detail. On the left is what's referred to as a circuit controller. We've talked about those in previous things, but circuit controller is just a simple switch, electrical switch that tells the signal system the position of the turnout it's attached to, whether it's open or closed. In the middle is an electric switch machine. Underneath that is a battery box. Remember, we talked about signal circuits. They're all low voltage DC circuits, and so they ran off batteries, and that's a battery box to hold them. On the far right hand side is a very, very characteristic New York Central signal installation, and I believe that's Berea, Ohio. And you can see they have little instrument sheds and battery boxes, and so there's a lot to it on the ground as well as in the air. All right, next signal, Russell. Next slide. Okay, on the left is a classic concrete battery box. These were usually precast and then taken to position and set in position. They had a truck with a crane, and they held lead acid batteries. There are several pages in the New York Central Signal Department book on how to maintain and charge lead acid batteries. So it was no small project. The beauty for the railroad of the batteries is when they were starting to install these signal systems back in the early part of the 20th century, teens and 20s and whatever, there was no guarantee that there'd be any local source of electricity. You know, a lot of cities back then had their own electrical companies, and they didn't even crank them up 24 hours a day. You may only have electricity at certain times of the day. The other beauty of the battery system for the railroad is it made them fairly bulletproof when it came to electrical storms and whatnot. Their signal system would continue to operate even if commercial power had gone out for whatever reason. And so on the right here is it's our newest little installation here for Russ's layout. This is the East Syracuse Tower, and there's a couple of battery boxes, and I think those are Details West products. Russell, is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, and then an instrument case behind that. That held the relays and the equipment that it took to make the signal system function. You could find them by themselves at signal installations. You could find them associated with towers. They were pretty common item all over the railroad. If you have access to standard plans for your railroad, I would encourage you to look at them. They probably will tell you about battery boxes and instrument cases, what their distance from the nearest rail, all the information you would need to sort of accurately model them. Standard plan books are always a good reference for making a railroad have a particular railroad's flavor. Okay, Russell, next slide.
You're there.
I am.
Yes.
Still looks like battery boxes to me.
How about instrument cases or instrument cases?
Ooh. Well, okay. Same deal. On the right-hand side is the one on Russell's layout. That's an older version of them. They were available from the signal manufacturers, Union Switch and Signal and General Railway Signal Company. The exact look of it depended on what supplier the railroad was using. For our purposes, I don't know that you can tell that much difference. And then back again to this picture on the left is the same. As we were talking about, this is Berea. Those are fairly modern little signal huts that the Norfolk Southern is using. But on the ground on either side, you can see some of the still have some battery cellars. Can't say there's anything wrong with the train in the background either. Okay, next slide. All right, dispatcher phone boxes. Now, if you are out in the country and it's CTC or you're at a tower or whatever, and there are absolute signals and the signal is red, you need to communicate with either the tower operator or the dispatcher. CTC installations, there was usually a light. There was be an instrument shed similar to the one on the right-hand side of this picture. And it would have a light attached to the outside of it, which was called a call light. And the rule and the instructions were, if you were stopped at that signal and that call light was illuminated, you were supposed to contact a dispatcher. But in any case, if you came up and the signal was all red, and it didn't change promptly, the brakeman or someone would have to go to the phone. So every place you have absolute signals, you should have a phone box. They were located at other places along the railroad as well. We have one at the Purina Road signal installation, just for looks. But back in the day, the only communication you could have most of the time with the dispatcher was by the telephone. And so boxes were not uncommon. It's one of those things that a lot of modelers don't model very often, but they were not uncommon on the prototype. Of course, in this photo to the left-hand side is another one of our battery boxes. I kind of like the installation myself. Next slide there, Russell. Okay, circuit controllers and electric clocks. On the left-hand side is the circuit controller. As I said, it's just a simple electrical switch that is connected to, on the prototype, they're called bridle rods. But if you look to the immediate left of the circuit control, you can see the rod going underneath the rail and to the far point connection, and that's what connects the points to the circuit controller to make the electrical switch inside the box function. Also, here's something else I didn't really notice, but I can briefly tell you. Russell, see the big aluminum box next to the circuit controller? Yeah, now go up a little bit toward right there. That is a bootleg. It's a connector for making the electrical connection to the track. I don't know, nobody makes that as a model. I suspect an N-scale pop valve for a steam engine would suffice. But anyway, that is a Union switch and signal method of making the connection to the rail. On the right, we have Russell's installation at Purina Road. There's a circuit controller. And then this device here is electric lock. Electric locks were on the switches to prevent vandals or unauthorized people from opening the switch. On Also, if you were switching there and you had closed the switch to let a train go by, you could not throw it to get back out on the main line without a waiting period. The idea being that you could not open the switch in front of a train that was operating at maximum authorized speed and perhaps had passed the last signal, so would therefore be might come up on this open switch at full speed, which wouldn't be a happy occasion. So the electric locks were commonly found on hand throw turnouts in controlled territory, whether it was controlled by a tower or in centralized traffic control. That's where you would generally find the electric locks. Okay, next. Russ.
It's there.
It is? Oh, it's coming. Okay. All right. On the left-hand side is an electric switch machine. It's what they refer to as a dual control switch machine. Yeah, there's the big hand lever. You have to get permission from the dispatcher or the powerman to put it in hand operation. But there's a little lever, and if you look close, can you show the little lever? Yeah. See on top of it, says motor. That means that it's controlled by the dispatcher or the towerman. To put it in hand operation, you have to get permission. You notice there's a switch lock down there. It's kind of in the shadows, but you have to take the lock off, flip that lever over 180 degrees, and the other side of it says hand. And once it's in hand, you can take the big lever. I think you're supposed to normally operate them over and back once by hand, and then you can line it as desired. And when you get all done using it, you put the hand throw lever back just like it is there. Flip the little lever back over to where it says motor, and put the lock back in it, and call the dispatcher to let them know that it's back in power operation. Sometimes if the dispatcher's having trouble, sometimes they'll tell you to put the switch in hand and use it in hand operation. And if you're wondering, that rusty piece back there next to the rail is a hood for switch heaters. Apparently got gas operated switch heaters, and that's to ensure that it will function in inclement winter weather. And on the right is an installation on Russ's layout and one of the double slip switches of an electric switch motor. And I think those are Details West issues too. So at any switch that would be controlled by either a towerman or the dispatcher, you should have a switch motor of some sort on it. Okay, next. All right, this is kind of a little added plus. Can we go back?
What's that, Steve?
Oh, there we go. That had flipped back to the previous slide for some reason. On the left is one of Russell's installations at Bailey Avenue, I believe. The thing he's circling there with the arrow is a relay box or relay case. When they didn't need all the space for relays and whatnot in an instrument case, then they could use smaller relay boxes. There are even smaller ones that mount strictly on a mast about that size. The top of it is like a weatherhead. What we didn't model, it would be the cable line coming down from the pole line, which we did make a double. Those are doubled up cross arms, which are typically what they use when they need to bring a cable drop off the lines. Yeah, that's another, modeling the actual lines is just an insanity and for us. But and you'll notice there's a phone box there. Right there across from the signal on both tracks should be insulated joints. But almost nobody ever models them. I think they are available from Details West. But on the right-hand side is a modern insulated joint. We found this up in the north end of Fostoria on the Chesapeake, Ohio, ex-Chesapeake and Ohio CSX line to Toledo, which is a really extremely heavy-duty operation. In fact, I have never seen 8-hole angle bars anywhere before, other than when we got up there. But these are assembled, they're factory assembled insulated joints. They use some sort of an epoxy material, and they're put together, and then they're made into short sections, and then they're welded in place with thermite welds in the field when they're actually set in place. What also shows up here are the connections, the electrical connections to either side of it. And that's how the signal system, they make the blocks for the prototype anyway, using the insulated joints. Oh, these are a huge improvement over the ones that would have been actually in Russell's era, because they used like a heavy fish paper and then bushings that had to go in around the bolts in the bolt holes to insulate the bolts from the rails. And they deteriorated rather quickly. They had to be very carefully placed as far as ties on either side to support it, because if they weren't supported, the joint got bad and was soft and low in a fairly short order. They were just insulated joints in the old days were just a lot of trouble to deal with. So those are the modern version. I think that brings us to the end of it, doesn't it, Russell?
Almost. Well, but Steve and I
Okay,
were kind of really surprised that here these very important wires are above ground. I mean, they weren't even buried. Kind of weird. So.
Yeah, I think you got one or two more. There we go. Okay.
It just must, Steve, it must take a while for it to, when I click here, for it to go through all the deals to get to you.
Yeah, Steve is having some type of delay. It's not you
That
guys.
maybe my internet connection, I guess. So anyway, this is sort of some additional reference material. Kalmbach has a new book out, which I think we got a little slide to show you about signals. I'm sure he will go into more detail about how to make them operate. And I actually have a copy of it ordered, but I haven't received it. I was gonna show it here. So anyway, of course, Mike's had his presentations on Arduinos, and I think he's going to gain a lot more experience getting Russell's signals up and going. So I think he's going to become a much more of an Arduino virtuoso than he already was. If you go back far enough, Bruce Chubb had a series in Model Railroader years ago on I think CMRI, computer model railroad interfacing. He has a signal system that actually does function like the prototype, but then he's got a wallet, unlike most of us. But he had a multi-part series on how he did that years ago. I think technically it may be, I don't know, maybe somewhat outmoded, but that's always an option if your wallet's deep enough. You can Google your railroad for your particular railroad for photos and information on their signals. Like I say, a lot of historical societies have standard plan books available. You can Google in General Railway Signal or Union Switch and Signal Company. There's lots of sources of information out there if you choose to use them, which I would of course recommend. All right, Russell, one more.
And guys, at 9 o'clock tonight, if you want to sign up for it, Dave will have, I guess if you want to say, kind of like a virtual book signing and tell you about this, but you need to get an invite, but you can do that through Kalmbach. I got an email, Fred got an email, maybe a lot of you did, you know, from, you know, through the model railroader. So check that out tonight if you wish.
And that brings us to the end and the opportunity for comments and questions.
Nice job, Steve. Very good. You and Russ both. Russ, do you have resistors on your rolling stock for block detection?